Bob Ellis and I are having a conversation. We want to share it with you. Bob, the question of the day is, are we better off with the election of a liberal Democrat in the state of South Dakota or in the nation? Or are we better off electing a liberal Republican who's pretending to be a conservative?
Well, that's an important question with a whole lot of facets associated with it, because you have upsides and downsides to either one of those. If you have a liberal Democrat who is in charge and running things, obviously there's a whole lot of damage that can be done to our infrastructure and to our values. If you have a liberal Republican running, well, that same kind of damage can be done, hopefully less, but what happens whenever you have a liberal Republican running and actually getting elected to a position? Not only do they do that damage by bringing liberalism into the picture, but they do damage to the conservative message, to the Republican message, because it really hurts the brand.
Well, it does in a number of ways. And what happens when you elect a liberal Republican who's presenting himself or herself as a conservative is you pollute the caucus. Now, many people don't understand the way the caucus works, but in South Dakota or in the United States Congress, it's the same thing. The parties gather together and in their own meetings. Well, if you have liberal Republicans controlling the Republican caucus, then what you do is you absolutely silence the conservative message.
Especially whenever those liberals are in charge, whenever they're the leaders and they're calling the shots.
Yes, and in South Dakota, we've seen historically. Well, my friend, Senator Dave Knudsen, a former Democrat turned Republican, then became the majority leader in the Senate. Do you think for a minute that those liberal tendencies didn't follow him? Well, certainly they did. And what happened in the Senate when I was serving is that there were only, I'm going to say, 6 or so solid conservatives in the entire Senate caucus. So liberals ruled the day.
Yeah.
You couldn't get a bill out of committee. You couldn't get a bill off the Senate floor that presented conservative principles because the liberals were in control of the Republican Party.
And we've seen too much of that in recent years, not just the Senate, but the House, especially the last few years, where we have good Republican bills, conservative bills that would come right out of the pages of the GOP platform, and these bills can't even make it out of committees that are controlled by Republicans, not just by a slim margin, but by a supermajority. And these bills can't even make it out onto the floor. And I think that provides a lot of cover sometimes, because these committee votes, they don't always get reported, they don't always get talked about, so we see liberal votes by Republicans at the committee level on bills that never see the light of day, at least as far as the public is concerned.
Conservatives in South Dakota have tried to, and I think they've been effective, at holding legislators accountable for their votes. And it's made some Republicans very, very unhappy and uncomfortable.
Yeah,
but you know, what we've seen in the South Dakota Republican Party, we've seen conservatives thrown out of the Republican caucus, thrown off of committees, and now Speaker Boehner in the United States House of Representatives is doing the same thing. It's out in the open. It's arrogant disrespect and disregard for conservatives who are willing to stand on principle.
Yes, it's becoming a very bad trend, and I wonder how we're supposed to convince the public to believe in Republican values and conservative values when we don't appear to believe in those values ourselves. When our own party rejects and turns away from Republican values, things we have on paper that we believe in and that we want to see accomplished, when we turn our backs on those, what does that say to the public?
Well, the Republican Party platform is the right platform nationally and in the state of South Dakota. But what good does it do when we send Republican elected officials to Pierre or to Congress in Washington and they ignore the platform?
When the platform is ignored, we almost might as well have a Democrat in there. Things are probably going to be worse with that Democrat, but we certainly aren't advancing those Republican ideals when those that we send into public office to represent those values refuse to represent them.
Well, this conversation is in part why I believe, and I think perhaps you agree, at least to some extent, that we're better off electing a liberal Democrat. than we are electing a liberal Republican who represents themselves to be a conservative.